Many people accuse Christianity of having contributed toward Nazism and the
It absolutely did.
Holocaust and Hitler's anti-Semitism. And there is a sense in which there was anti-Jewish sentiment that had developed over the centuries, so we can't deny that as
Okay.
Christians, and we need to confront that and recognize that and, in fact, repent of it in that sense. However, Hitler's anti-Semitism
There is no however to this equation. Full stop.
was quite distinct from Christian forms of anti-Judaism.
No, it wasn't. Are you serious right now? This guy presents himself as a World War II expert, okay? As a Hitler's religion expert. He almost certainly knows more about the subject than I do. However, I know enough about this subject to be able to recognize when he's lying about something. So I want to listen to what he has to say here about Hitler's religion, and I will add context to it. And it's actually like, so we have a couple of videos. We have like this 2-minute long one. We have another 2-minute one. And then we've got this 35-minute one where he like breaks down his whole belief about it. He's from a group called the Forum of Online, wait, what's it called? The hell's it called? Forum of Christian Leaders, FOCL. And they get on here and they just like propagandize nonstop. So let's listen to what he has to say here. While we listen, we're going to play some Pokemon Fire Red. It's actually a ROM hack of Fire Red called Ultraviolet, where I can where I can catch every Pokemon.
Many people accuse Christianity of having contributed toward Nazism and the Holocaust and Hitler's
It absolutely did.
anti-Semitism. And there is a sense in which there was anti-Jewish sentiment that had developed over the centuries, so we can't deny that as Christians, and we need to confront that and recognize that and, in fact, repent of it.
Okay, now you can just stop talking right there. You're good. You have covered everything you need to say on the subject.
In that sense. However, Hitler's anti-Semitism was quite distinct from Christian forms of anti-Judaism.
No, it wasn't. It was born of Christian beliefs about, anti-Semitism. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this dude called Pantera. Tiberius Julius Abdes Pantera. The names Tiberius and Julius were given names from his time in battle. Pantera was his name, and there was a prevailing belief in the Germanic region in the, I think the 1860s is when it started. Yeah, 1859, right here. His tombstone was found in Bingerbrook, Germany, 1859, and Christians in the region developed this belief that he was the father of Jesus. That Jesus was not actually like, fatherless. It wasn't Joseph, it wasn't God, it was Pantera. Anyway, if Jesus was born of a Roman, that means he was Aryan, and that makes him, have blonde hair, blue eyes. See, just like that. Even though Romans don't have blonde hair and blue eyes. Don't poke too many holes. It all falls apart then. Anyway, that was a Christian belief that Hitler adopted. You know some other Christian beliefs that Hitler adopted? Hitler loved Jesus. Big Jesus fan. He kept coming back to the fact that Jesus braided a whip outside the temple and then went in and whipped all the money changers and stuff. You guys remember that? Kept saying that Jesus was not a raging anti-Semite, but the first anti-Semite and one of the first Aryans, maybe the first Aryan. I don't know, have any idea. No, not the first Aryan, but early Aryans. Anyway. By the way, the term Aryan has religious connotations. Germans at the time, back in World War II era, and by the way, this guy knows all this. He is a World War II expert. I'm not saying something that he would disagree with. I'm adding context that shoots his beliefs to shit. He knows what he's saying right now is a lie, and I'll prove that in a minute. Anyway, there was this, back in Germany, they called themselves Volk, V-O-L-K. And it wasn't just the word folk or folks or race or people. It had metaphysical implications to it. The Volk were supernaturally unique and special, ordained by God, chosen. Aryans are not a real race, obviously. It's this fictitious belief in supermen, basically. So Hitler believed that there were Hitler believed there's a large group of supermen with blonde hair and blue eyes that were extremely powerful, extremely tall. They were created directly by God, the Christian God, by the way. and they were special. They're intelligent and everything else. And they were moving around the planet, mating with basically inferior species in India and China and everywhere else. And that was ultimately their downfall. The fact that they were mating with inferior species, which produced like hybrid mongrels, quote unquote. That's the word they used, mongrel. Which led to the downfall of the Aryan race in that region. And then, Indians took over, or Chinese took over, or whatever after that, because they had a little bit of Aryan blood in them, which made them intelligent enough to run a city or whatever. So when the Aryans realized, but this is all a religious belief, by the way, when the Aryans realized what was happening, they all came back to where God had originally created them, Germany. And they lived there exclusively, and they didn't allow anybody else into their little group anymore. But Jews, these scoundrels, realized that God created the Aryans to replace them because God was pissed off at the Jews. So they slowly and quietly slipped into Aryan society to destroy it, to mate with the Aryans and destroy the society just to hurt them. That's the religious belief. So Hitler believed that they needed to get back to pure-blooded Aryanism again when they would be supermen, and that meant getting rid of all the non-Aryans, aka the Jews, in the area. That was the religious belief. Again, all based around Christianity, based around Jesus and everything else. It was a full-blown religious, supernatural Christian belief. What kind of drugs were the authors of this myth on? I'm concerned. Yeah, it was crazy, dude. Seriously. Very crazy belief system. Anyway, I thought Hitler was an atheist for a while. After, I've been reading these books and everything, trying to understand the whole thing. And I think I've come to the conclusion that Hitler was not an atheist. He was a whatever the hell that is, which includes Christianity by necessity. He was a Christian, but he believed some weird stuff within the Christian belief system. Very similar to like modern day, like Christian nationalists in America. They have very weird beliefs, right? Like the Bible very clearly says, don't make an idol for yourself. And pay Caesar's things back to Caesar and pay God's things back to God. Focus on God and the kingdom and converting people, not on government. And they all just completely ignore that. The Bible says, love everybody, take care of your fellow man, so on and so forth. Jesus says that, And they just ignore that part. And they have flags. They literally wrap themselves in flags, crying. Yeah, right here. This is Dutch Sheets. He's one of the leaders in what's called the New Apostolic Reformation. It is a Christian nationalist group. I just want to draw a kind of a parallel between Christian nationalists of today and the religious beliefs of Germany between 1914 really, and 1945.
I went to over in the corner and I grabbed a flag we had and I wrapped it around me and I laid on the floor and I sobbed and I knew I was crying with him. I knew we were crying together for this nation, Gene.
The guy, I watched this whole episode leading up to this. The guy was giving a sermon because he's a pastor at like a mega church. And in the middle of the sermon, he started crying. Inexplicably, seemingly out of nowhere, no one had any idea what was going on. He just starts crying. And he stopped giving the sermon, walks over to the flag in the corner, and wraps himself in the flag and lays on the ground crying because, America is not doing what God wants it to do or whatever the hell. Where in the Bible does it say anything about that? Where would it, justify this? This is nuts, right? This is, completely outside of the biblical expectations of anything. And his wife sees what's happening. She ushers everybody out of this big church, turns off the lights, and leaves, and just lets him lay there on the floor crying for, I think he said 9 hours?
And it became so intense that at one point I said, and I meant this. This was not hype, or I'm not trying to be sensational here. I said, God, please, you have to stop this because my heart is literally going to break and I'm going to die. And
He's talking about Donald Trump losing the election and, Republicans generally losing.
And I said, please don't kill me. So for 3.5 hours, this happened. And here's what he said to me at one point. And I know this was God. And I could never, ever, ever be convinced this wasn't God.
Okay.
He said, I must have this nation. I must have this nation back.
Okay. And the point is that, like, Christianity today, let me rephrase, Christian nationalism from the New Apostolic Reformation, these people right here are completely off their rocker and match up with Christianity in almost no way at all. But they are still Christians very clearly, right? They're Christian. In the same way, Hitler was a Christian. I think that he believed it to the bottom of his heart, truly. I really do. Now, there are some quotes in something called Table Talk. In Hitler's final days, he lived in a bunker, right? And he was down there with his secretary, Bormann, I think the guy's name was, and he had another secretary after that. And, this is between the years 1942 and 1945 when he finally died. Hang on. Let me just double check this. Okay, no. So this is actually before he moved into the bunker. He took up residence in the Führer bunker, is what it's called, January 16th, 1945. That's like 4 months before he died. But Table Talk was written over the course of 3 years before he died. And it was written by his assistant and some other people. A guy named Speer, Speer, and then Bormann, his assistant, and then he had another assistant that helped to write it. And it was compiled into like one book, basically. And it's considered the evidence that Hitler was not Christian. However, the English version was translated like way later. And Richard Carrier, as a matter of fact, happens to be a scholar in this field, too. I didn't realize that. He picked it apart and talked about why it's untrustworthy, basically. There are like 44 statements or something in there that Hitler makes about religion that do not hold up to scrutiny, like that he didn't say that. Also, Bormann, the guy that was writing a lot of it, was very much critical of religion and put words on Hitler's lips that were contradicted by other accounts of Hitler. Like Goebbels, for example, his propaganda minister, contradicted what Bormann put in Table Talk. Anyway, the English translation certainly is not trustworthy. The German translation itself is of questionable validity. But either way, pretty much every single statement that Hitler made that was critical of Christianity was not critical of Christianity. It was critical of the church, of organized religion, of Protestantism and Catholicism. Distinct difference there. I just heard that Dimebag was Jesus' daddy. Yep, that's right. Anyway, so let's continue listening to this guy just lie. He knows better than this.
In that Hitler thought the worst thing that possibly could happen would be for Jews to convert to Christianity, which obviously is not what Christianity was going to be offering as the what should happen to Jews. They believe
that's true, sure,
that the Jews should convert. And the reason for that is because in the mid-19th century...
Hang on, I'm sorry. Christianity did not believe that the Jews should convert. He's lying here again. A small subset of about 10% of pastors, 2,000 out of the 18,000 Protestants, split off from the main federation because they believed that Jews should be allowed to convert. The other 16,000 agreed with Hitler. And they were Nazis. The leaders were Nazis of these churches. So,
century, many German thinkers who had become secularized began developing a new kind of way of thinking about the Jews, not as a religion, but as a race.
They were secularized? Really? They weren't religious enough is what you're telling me? Are you serious? He's lying. He knows he's lying. Like I said, he knows more about the subject than me by 1.5 miles. He can't not know that he is lying right now. Hitler made it clear he was Christian in Mein Kampf. He did. The rebuttal to that is Hitler was cynically using Christianity to his own ends. That's what a lot of these people say. However, the books that I've read, the scholars that I've listened to, have concluded that a conspiracy to that degree would not have worked. And all of the things that Hitler said privately add up to him believing in Christianity, just not liking the church specifically. There was a period of time there where I believed that Hitler was an atheist, probably kind of like Donald Trump, but I don't believe that's true now that I've read more on the subject.
But as a race. And so this secularized form of anti-Semitism, the word anti-Semitism only emerged, in fact, in that context. The word anti-Semitism didn't exist before that time.
Before what time? It existed since the early 1900s. I'm not sure what time he's referring to here. I know of the guy that invented the term. I read about him.
This new secularized form of anti-Semitism was based on the idea that Jews pass on their heredity, pass on their traits through heredity. And
that wasn't secularized. That was religious. That was religious belief. This guy's just lying. This infuriates me.
It has nothing to do with their religion. So when the Nazis persecuted the Jews, they didn't care whether they were atheists, agnostics, whether they were practicing Jews, or whether they'd converted to Christianity.
That's true, yep.
They were still sent to Auschwitz or other death camps on the basis of their heritage.
Yeah.
So Hitler's view in that sense was quite different from the Christian view.
No, it really was not different from the Christian view from the era. And you know what? Hitler believed himself to be, and others in the region, the only legitimate Christians, the original legitimates, because Catholicism took over the entire region. Actually took over the whole Western world in the Catholicost, where, this big takeover. Catholic means Catholic means universal, like everybody believes something. And the okost suffix means whole. This universal belief system took over the whole world. That's kind of what Catholicost means. Anyway, they take over the region in the early thousands, like between the year 33 CE and 900 CE, basically, they were trying to take over. And in 1517, Martin Luther from Germany was a monk and didn't like what Catholicism was up to. So he split off and created a brand new religious denomination called Lutheranism there in Germany. And pretty much all the Christians in that region were Lutherans from the original Lutheranism. So they believed themselves to have more correct information, practices, and beliefs than any other ecumenical church, is what it's called. Any other church in the region or in the world, basically. So anyway, what they're describing right now, what this guy's describing is actually Christian belief. He's describing Christian belief in the region.
Jews and Judaism.
He's just lying here. Check this one out. This is from another video from him.
So if Hitler was not a Christian, then what was he? Well, if you read carefully his works, his speeches and such, it seems the closest thing we can probably pin him down on, and again, he may not even had it completely consistent.
Do not say paganism or the occult. Do not say it.
It's metaphysic, but I think the closest we can come is identifying him as a pantheist.
Okay, that wasn't paganism. I suppose I'll take it, but it's still wrong. He was a Christian.
That is, he believed that nature is divine, or
That is incorrect. That is not what he believed. He was a Christian, period.
Identifying as a pantheist. That is, he believed that nature is divine, or nature is God.
That's not true.
He talks quite often about nature in a deified sense. If you read Mein Kampf, he's consistently deifying nature.
No, that's not true. He was of the belief that God placed Aryans in Germany to take authority over the earth, quote unquote. That's from the Bible, to take authority over the planet. And God used natural means to accomplish his goals. So anytime you hear any examples of Hitler deifying nature, quote unquote, that's not what's happening. He was deifying God and worshiping the fact that God was using nature to accomplish his ends. That's it.
In fact, the translator...
This guy knows that. He knows that. He's lying.
Mein Kampf, he's consistently deifying nature. In fact, the translators of Mein Kampf always capitalize nature. So the translators, and by the way, there's more than one translation. There's several.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but either way, it doesn't matter. Historians from the era and from today know better than that.
several translations, and they all do this. So the translators recognized that he was not just speaking of nature in some generic sense that we normally would be speaking of it. And so they end up capitalizing nature to signify that.
He was using nature as the hand of God.
Hitler also calls nature eternal at times. And if nature is eternal, then that means that it wasn't created by some other being.
He is so full of shit.
Or some other god. So there's quite a number of ways. And to just give one other example, Hitler once said that he wanted to tear down a Catholic pilgrimage church in Linz, Austria, which is where he had grown up, so he was well familiar with this area, and put a planetarium and observatory there
so that they could appreciate the universe. Yes, that is true. That did happen. However, Hitler didn't like the Catholic Church because it was a challenge to his power. He liked the Protestant Church because they were useful idiots for him. But his beliefs more closely aligned with Catholicism, and he grew up Catholic. So, anyway, he probably tore down a Catholic church to get one over on them, and he wanted to put up an observatory to show God's splendor and glory.
People could, instead of going to worship at a Catholic a pilgrimage church, they could essentially see the wonders of creation and nature.
Creation. Interesting word he chose to use there, huh?
And so all these things put together and a lot of other evidence, I think, does suggest that Hitler was a pantheist.
Okay, well, you're wrong. No, he's not wrong. He's lying, I believe. Anyway, he did a full-blown episode, like a 30-minute something or other, and I wanted to just kind of listen to what he had to say here. I listened to a little bit of it, and I caught him in some lies in here. He also has some correct information, so let's just talk about what he's got going on here.
The Psalms this morning where it says that, it is time for you to act, O Lord, for they have made your law void. And if anyone made God's law void, it was Hitler. So it's kind of remarkable, perhaps, that atheists and skeptics routinely accuse Christianity for Hitler's atrocities.
It was responsible for Hitler's atrocities. You know what? Even if Hitler was an atheist and cynically using the church set themselves up to be used. They made it easy. They set Hitler up to take advantage of them as much as he possibly could, as much as he wanted to. The poor fools.
See Hitler's atrocities and blame on Christianity, which, by the way, suggests that there is objective evil in the world if they're going to try to make these, if they're going to get all worried about this too, which sort of is.
Are you saying that evil doesn't exist if objective evil doesn't exist? Like, can't I look at what's happening in society and be, like, horrified by it, whether a book tells me it's horrifying or not? Are you serious right now?
It flies in the face of their own worldview anyway, which says there's no such thing as objective good or objective evil, but I'm not going to get into that today. But skeptics typically raise two lines of argument about Nazism and Hitler. First of all, they try to blame Christian anti-Semitism, or they try to blame the Holocaust on Christian anti-Semitism. And the second point that they try to make is claiming that Hitler was a Christian and was doing his things out of Christian convictions.
Both of those things are true.
So I'm going to deal pretty quickly with the first one and then deal most of the time with the second one, which I've spent my whole book on.
Yeah, that should be better.
Doing his things out of Christian convictions. So I'm going to deal pretty quickly with the first one and then deal most of the time with the second one, which I've spent my whole book on Hitler's religion.
I got that book. I remember going through this book and thinking, holy shit, this book is terrible. It is full of bias from beginning to end. I bought it and I was so infuriated that I spent all that money on it that I tried to return it and Audible wouldn't let me, and tried to write a review and they said you haven't read enough of this book and everything. I don't mind. I just want the truth of the matter, okay? I don't care what religion Hitler was. He could have been a pagan occultist for all I care. I don't. I want to know the truth of the matter, plain and simple. And this guy was very clearly not providing the truth of the matter.
Talking about. So how do we respond to this notion that of Christian anti-Semitism having produced the Holocaust? Well, first of all, we as Christians need to acknowledge that this was a problem in Christianity, at least as Christianity broadly defined.
Broadly defined. Anti-Semitism was a problem in Christianity, broadly defined. No, it was a problem in Christianity. Hitler used the fact that Jews killed Jesus as a justification to hate the Jews, to whip Christians into a blood frenzy over it.
Oh, historically. That is, there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment, and not only in the Catholic Church throughout the Middle Ages, but Luther wrote a famous diatribe against the Jews.
Yep, I think it was called On the Jews and Their Lies.
Toward the end of his life as well.
Oh my God, it was crazy, some of the shit he put in there.
So how do we respond to that? Well, one way to respond to it, I think, is to note that those that were purveying those kinds of ideas were completely contrary to the founding principles of Christianity, and thus it was a distorted, perverted kind of Christianity. In fact, Peter actually prophesied.
Look, I don't care if you want to call it distorted or perverted or whatever. It was Christianity, okay? I don't know. Look, here's the problem with this whole thing. He says objective morality can't blah, 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 whatever, right? What about objective Christianity? What objective Christianity is there? You can't tell me that it's a perverted version of Christianity like that, because everybody has their own interpretation of Christianity. It's a self-ascribed label. If they identify as Christian, then they're Christian. If they're doing things for Christian reasons, then that's what it is. You can't deny that because you don't like it.
In 2 Peter, that some people were going to become false teachers, and it says, because of them, the way of truth will be evil spoken of. So the idea is that there's going to be these false forms of Christianity. They're going to be out there that are going to tarnish real Christianity, the real truth. And that's what
And he has the real truth, of course, you see, right.
we've seen happen precisely. But another response to that issue about Christian anti-Semitism is that Hitler's kind of anti-Semitism was not really a form of Christian anti-Semitism.
Yes, it was.
Hitler embraced a secularized version of anti-Semitism, which
No, he didn't.
only came into being in the middle of the 19th century as European thought was becoming more secularized during that time. The key difference and the key shift that was going to take place in the 19th century, by the way, the word anti-Semitism didn't even exist until the 19th century.
Yeah, I thought it was the early 1900s, but maybe it was the 1800s.
Mid-19th century, and it came about as a result of this secularized version
No, it didn't.
of opposition to the Jews. And the way that it was different from the older form of anti-Jewish thought was that it focused on Jews as a race,
Like, this guy's just lying.
not as a religion. So if you look back at like Luther and in the Middle Ages, Catholicism, their solution to what they called the Jewish problem was conversion. They should become Christians. You know, let the Jews come on in and join the Catholic Church or join the Lutheran Church.
Yeah, okay, so Jews were very much hated in that region throughout history. Honestly, they've been hated throughout history, you know, from beginning to end, honestly. Like, in the 1300s, Jews were blamed for the Black Plague. I think it was the 1300s, right? Because they lived separately from society and nobody knew what they were up to, and they believed that they were bringing about the Black Plague because they weren't getting infected with it since they lived so separately from society. Anyway, that's when a lot of the accusations started flying around about Jews sacrificing Christian children to whatever, you know. And that saved their lives, basically, sacrificing Christian children. Yeah, so anti-Semitism has existed for a very long time.
That would be the way that they thought the Jewish solution would be solved. However, Hitler thought that that was the worst thing that could possibly happen, would be for the Jews to convert to Christianity.
I don't think he thought it was the worst thing that could happen. I think he just believed that Jews were trying to destroy Aryans.
Because he saw the Jews not as a religion, but as a race. And so he thought there was something hereditary about being a Jew, and he thought that there was all these negative things hereditarily about being a Jew, because he thought that being a Jew is not just about, again, practicing a religion. He thought there was these bad moral traits that he thought were biologically passed on from generation to generation. So the idea was that Jews are deceitful, Jews are lascivious, Jews are greedy, you know, all these different negative stereotypes that had developed over the centuries about Jews. He thought those were biologically ingrained traits. And so the worst thing that could happen would be for them to convert to Christianity and import those biological traits into the German gene pool.
That's true.
And so here we see a Nazi poster, propaganda picture, that has a picture of a Jew here, and apparently his wife. They're coming out of a church. He has a Bible, rosary beads in his hand there. And
okay, just for the record, there was a lot of weird propaganda from the era, obviously. I'm sure I don't even need to say that, but be skeptical of anything that you hear from this guy's mouth or anything that he shows you, because some of these pieces of propaganda I have not seen and I cannot verify. And he's already like, you know, a proven verified liar as far as I'm concerned.
the caption to that says, baptism did not make him a non-Jew. So the idea is you can't get rid of your Jewishness by converting and by becoming a Christian. And notice what he's doing also. He's sort of ogling these young ladies over here, sort of sending another signal about what the Jews are like in that particular propaganda piece. So Hitler did not want Jews to convert to Christianity. Also, if you look at Hitler's relationship to Judaism and such, he rejected the Old Testament altogether. And Hitler even rejected the writings of Paul because he thought that the Apostle Paul was a sneaky Jewish rabbi.
Okay, this is super interesting. So he says he rejected the Old Testament altogether. It wasn't actually Hitler that started that rejection of the Old Testament. It was one of his, God, I don't remember what his name was now. It was Eckhart, maybe? It was one of Hitler's mentors, basically. And the guy believed that the Old Testament should be removed from the Bible because it's so materialistic. It's like too materialistic for a Christian, basically. And there's a guy named Marcion. I think his name was either Mars or Marcion. Anyway, he created Marcion thought. And the line of thought is the Old Testament God and the New Testament God are completely different from each other. They're like, you know, the Old Testament is like violent and vengeful and genocidal and hateful and punish you for anything at all. And the New Testament God is like loving and peaceful and kind and caring and wants to take care of your neighbors and everything else. So they're two different gods. And it should be disconnected from Judaism entirely. Christianity should. And as a result, this guy argued that the Old Testament should just go. And that's eventually what would happen. You know, Hitler promoted positive Christianity, which did that. It was a kind of a misnomer, an intentional misnomer, kind of like the Ministry of Truth or whatever, you know, from the book 1984. War is peace and truth, or lies are truth and things like that. Anyway, positive Christianity was Hitler's, as far as the scholars that I'm reading say, it was Hitler's genuine, real, true Christian belief. They wanted to remove the Old Testament. They wanted to remove Jews entirely from Christianity. They wanted to rewrite Jesus as being the first anti-Semite and Aryan. And they wanted to, what was the other thing? I'm trying to remember now. And they wanted to rewrite the New Testament to remove a bunch of things, like things that didn't really match up with their existing beliefs. Like if they found something they didn't like in the New Testament, they'd pull it out and claim that it was written by a Jew, and so it just didn't belong, basically. Cootmaster, welcome. God was only angry because the Israelites were disobedient. That's true. He's a little angrier than justified, right? Seems to me. Either way, the God of the New Testament, the God of the Old Testament have very different personalities. They're portrayed very differently, is the point.
Who imported Jewish ideas into Christianity and corrupted it from the very start. So Hitler basically thought Christianity had been corrupted at the very beginnings. However, interestingly, Hitler did seem to have good things to say about Jesus.
Yeah, dude loved Jesus.
But his picture of Jesus was not the biblical picture of Jesus.
Oh, and that made him not Christian, right? Look, if you follow Christ, you're a Christian, plain and simple.
His picture of Jesus was as an Aryan fighter against the Jews. How could he see Jesus as an Aryan fighter against the Jews? Well, for one thing, he didn't believe in the virgin birth, so he thought that Jesus had been fathered by a Roman soldier.
Yeah, all this is true, absolutely. He didn't believe in the virgin birth. He thought it was the Roman soldier Pantera. And yeah, just leave it at that.
And that had given him his Aryan blood.
There you go. And he gave him his Aryan blood.
And also, the story that he loved most about Jesus, and the story that he tells most if you read through Hitler's writings and speeches and such, the story that he tells most about Jesus was Jesus driving the Jews out of the temple. And so there he sees Jesus as a fighter. He's got a whip in his hand, and interestingly, here's a picture showing Hitler with a whip in his hand.
Like I said, don't believe a picture that he puts up here, not one, or anything that he says without looking it up. I haven't actually seen this picture before. I'm not doubting its veracity, but you'll see in a minute why I'm skeptical of anything that this guy puts up.
In his early days of his political career, I don't know if he was trying to pose as Jesus here and thinking of himself in that thing, but he may have been. But in any case, he saw that Jesus driving the money-grubbing Jews out of the temple, right? Why were the Jews in the temple that he was driving out? Is because they were doing business in the temple. And so
Yeah, he also loved portraying himself as Jesus or fitting himself into that role in one way or another. That was like his big thing. He used to call himself all kinds of religious terms. Like he said, he prophesied this thing happened or that thing happened. He was a prophet, and people laughed at him because he prophesied that the Jews would have problems later on because they're causing blah, 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 whatever. He just liked using those types of words.
Again, playing on these stereotypes of the Jews there. So from what I've already said, it should be perhaps apparent that there's some problems with Hitler's claim to be a Christian. So why then do
No, there aren't problems with his claim to be a Christian. There are problems with his version of Christianity and your version of Christianity. You simply don't agree with his interpretation of the Bible or whatever, or history. I don't either. I'm just saying it's not the same.
atheists and skeptics then make this claim?
So step back here a little bit.
Claim to be a Christian. So why then do atheists and skeptics then make this claim that Hitler was a Christian? Well, the simple answer is Hitler claimed to be a Christian. So the 25-point program of the Nazi Party, which was put out in 1919, right at the beginning of Hitler's political career in the National Socialist German Workers' Party, what we often refer to as a Nazi Party.
NSDAP was its official name. Also, I thought Hitler didn't join the Nazi Party until 1921. Wait, the German Workers' Party. Yeah, it was 1921. I'm not sure what he's talking about. It's July 29th, 1921. That's when he became the leader of it, I suppose. And it changed its name from the German Workers' Party to National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, in 1920. I was trying to figure out when he joined the Nazi Party. Maybe he did join in 1919.
The 25-point program espoused what it called positive Christianity.
Yep.
Didn't really define what that meant, but it did make that statement. And then one of the favorite quotations of atheists and other skeptics is in April 1922 in a speech when Hitler called Jesus his Lord and Savior. Here's the direct quote: "My Christian feeling directs me to my Lord and Savior as a fighter." Notice the "as a fighter" part there. Again, you see Jesus as a fighter. So he called Jesus his Lord and Savior there. And there were other places when he was campaigning politically he did the same kind of thing. Of course, we know that Hitler would never lie to us about something as important as religion.
Again, as far as I have read, the scholars that I'm listening to and reading and everything else, specifically, what was his name again? Specifically Steigman Gall, Richard Steigman Gall, and others, Hitler, the conspiracy that Hitler, didn't believe in Christianity at all. He was just cynically using it. That's all it is. It's a conspiracy. It's not realistic. The people at the very top of the Nazi Party and Hitler's inner circle, many of them were atheist, some of them at the very least, but people misinterpret these people as being Nazi. I'm sorry. A lot of people misinterpret the people at the very top of the Nazi Party as being atheist when actually they're not. They're just a very specific form of Christian that aligns closely with the Aryan myth or whatever. That being said, near the end of all of this stuff, there's a period of time where, I'm trying to, I have the exact information. Let me see if I can get it. Here you go. This is from the book, The Third Reich at War. I'm not sure which page it is. I usually write page numbers down, but I can't find the page number. Anyway, it says, quote, "But no anti-Christian measure was more widely resented than a decree issued by the Bavarian education minister, Adolf Wagner." Bavaria was a German state, by the way. On April 23rd, 1941, ordering school prayers to be replaced by Nazi songs and crucifixes and religious pictures to be removed from school walls. This was retribution for basically Catholics not falling into line 100% completely and totally behind him. So people start complaining about that, and it says they were backed by a powerful pastoral letter from Cardinal Faulhaber, read out from the church pulpits on August 17th, 1941. The opposition was clearly not going away. Humiliated, Wagner, who was the leader of the education minister of Bavaria, had to issue public revocation of the order, release the 59 priests, order all crucifixes to be put back in the schools, and permit a prayer, with an officially approved wording, to be read out in the morning assembly. That is not what I was looking for, though. Hang on. Here it is. Children receiving lunches from the National Socialist Welfare Program in Cologne, for example, were obligated to recite a grace before and after the meal, which substituted the leader's name for God. Hitler had, people replaced Hitler's name with God's name in prayer. Just want to make that so that I know how to search it. They also claimed that the Pope was half Jewish. They were really demonizing Catholicism at this point as much as they could. Himmler was very impressed with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think that Himmler may have been one of the atheist people at the top. He might have been an atheist, and he might have also been an occultist. Like, I'm leaning toward, I don't know, it's hard to know for sure. He was certainly into like some occult stuff. So anyway, Himmler, he was so impressed by Jehovah's Witnesses, this is in my notes, he was impressed with their fanaticism that he held them up to his SS men as an example, because Himmler was like the leader of the SS, the police basically in Germany. He said that we should be more like them. And because somebody at a concentration camp would pull a Jehovah's Witness out of line and shoot him in the head in front of all the other Jehovah's Witnesses. And he'd say, swear to me you're not a Jehovah's Witness now, to the rest of the group that just saw this happen. And they wouldn't. They refused. They said, no, we're not denouncing God. That's just what it is. Staring death in the face, just watched their friend get shot in the head, and they're refusing. That is some shit, man. I remember when I was little, they trained me to understand that I cannot deny God no matter what. It doesn't matter. If I deny God, I will not get into his kingdom afterward. It's like the world's like unforgivable sin or whatever. You cannot deny God. Anyway, that was the thing that like really impressed Himmler, and he told Hitler that, we should kind of program that fanaticism into people because it seems really useful. And he said we should also replace heaven with Valhalla, because Valhalla is kind of a what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a kind of a reward at the end of the rainbow that moves people away from Christianity. And Hitler basically said, I don't want mysticism slipping into Nazism. It is not a mystic cult, quote unquote. Those are the words he used, mystic cult. Another big problem with with church and state and everything, the problem isn't that church and state were joined necessarily. I mean, that was a problem, a big problem. But for the sake of argument, let's say the fact that church and state were joined did not outright cause Nazism, right? It would have been better if they hadn't been joined at all. But the real problem is that they kept bouncing back and forth. They kept switching from, taking part in politics when it was convenient to not taking part in politics when it was convenient. And Bonhoeffer was number 2 in the Confessing Church, next to Niemöller. The Confessing Church, when it split off, it had a saying that it liked to use a lot. What was it? I have it written down here. I took notes yesterday on it. It was here. Church must remain church. That was the kind of slogan for the Confessing Church, the church that split off when Hitler took over. So the Confessing Church, 2,000 pastors out of 18,000 total, that was the only group that wanted to remain separate from government. And did they really want to remain separate from government? Like, if it was convenient, would they have inserted themselves into government? I know they would have, because they did at certain points. So the church, when it was convenient, was inserting themselves into government, and where it was inconvenient for Hitler, he was banning the church from being involved in government. So if the church was inserting themselves in government and it was a benefit to Hitler, he just kept his mouth shut. He let it happen. He put as many crosses into those schools as they wanted. But when they started pushing against his beliefs and everything, he started banning them and removing church, crosses from like schools and things. That's basically how it worked. Let's continue listening here with that context in mind.
So, of course, he must have been a Christian, right?
He was a Christian, yes.